Stability, stimulus, solidarity. Stability.
It's day 3 of the Lib Democrat conference, the big speech by Vince Cable, where he's laying out what he calls responsible capitalism.
Growth, and that's sustainable growth based on business investment, exports, green technology. Banks operate a bit like a man who either wears his trousers around his chest, stifling breathing, which is what they do at the moment, or around their ankles, exposing their assets. The workers and pensioners are paying the penalty for a crisis they did not create. Responsible capitalism. And as for irresponsible capitalism, some of you may have noticed that one of the big media companies has recently had a spot of bubble. Liberal Democrats know that you can't do one without the other. So we must now do both. Fairness and recovery. Thank you.
All-party conferences happen in a sort of bubble of alternative reality, and that was a very good example. For all the good sense of some of what Vince Cable said, it really sort of tests your belief, because he talks about fairness and recovery, and we all know at the moment there are precious few signs of either. Tell me, first of all, what you thought of Vince Cable's speech.
Just after it, I was standing in the press gallery and Nick Clegg came roaring past, a kind of posse of Lib Dem notables, really moving fast from one part of the Commons to another. He shouted at me, "It's stakeholder capitalism. You could have written that." And I thought, actually, in a way, he's right. In a way, Cable has done more in the last 16 months to reform British capitalism than Brown and Blair managed in 13 years.
Talk about reforming capitalism, putting it on a more long-term footing, finally bridging the skills gap and all the things that come with it. How do you do that in the context of a scorched earth, short to medium term economic policy? That's the problem.
I've been saying this from day one. It was absolutely obvious that to attack this degree of the structural deficit in the lifetime of Parliament was self-defeating, and we know that. We know already that the government's going to miss its own deficit reduction plans because it's induced such a scale of depression that the tax revenues aren't coming in. It's in a complete fix of its own devices.
What does responsible capitalism mean?
Responsible capitalism, it means not being a greedy banker, taking all the money, taking a bonus when you've not actually done very well.
Trying to control the markets to a certain extent and ensure that those who are the poorest aren't affected by changes in the market.
Give me an idea of what responsible capitalism actually consists of, and why it's taken this long. This isn't a criticism of you, but why it's taken this long for British politics to even begin to talk about it.
Well, I know what it means because I grew up with it. I grew up in York, round trees, Terrys, Quaker companies, committed to the community, looking after their employees, thinking about the long term. That's what I mean by responsible capitalism. There are a lot of very good British companies like that. We need more of them, and we need to make sure that the capital markets work in such a way as to reinforce those good habits rather than bad ones.
We spoke to Will Hutton earlier on, and he thought he'd heard in your speech distinct signs of a break from the economic orthodoxy of the last 30 years. Did you intend it to sound as dramatic as that?
He's right in the sense that we're in very dangerous times. All the kind of models that we've lived with for a generation, efficient markets and all that. A lot of that's crumbling. We're having to rethink the way that capitalist economies work, and I'm coming up with an approach which I hope is new and certainly better.
Can you deliver responsible capitalism in the company of Conservatives who in recent history have believed in exactly the reverse?
I think we can deliver it, and the steps we set out this morning, the consultation on remuneration, on long-termism, we can get the direction right.
I've never done this before. That's what happens. That's the definition of trying to enforce progressive politics in an age of globalisation. You're running up a down escalator.
I haven't done any politics.
You need some politics.
Why?
Because we have to make the world a better place.
Through politics.
How much are you paid an hour?
here.
Yeah.
It was crap.
Right, okay,
But
so
this-
we have to
but
make
this-
sure you get paid a living or decent level of pay,
That's
right?
true, but they'll never do it.
Well, we got to at least try.
Yeah, but you try, and what you do, you just knock your head against the brick wall because the government's a macho.
Not having it. Somehow we have to get responsible capitalism, and at the moment we've got irresponsible capitalism.
Yeah, but you see, irresponsible capitalism that you've got, right?
Yeah.
They've got the money, they've got the power, they've got the guns, they've got the nuclear weapons, they just nuke us all. And they go into the big bunker and they have it. That's what it's going to.
You've thought this through. What do you understand by the term responsible capitalism?
I believe that both shareholders and companies should make sure that they're not just thinking always about the bottom line, but their responsibilities to the community, the wider environment and so on. That's one of the reasons why I, as Business Minister, have published today something on narrative reporting to try to change the way quoted companies have to report, not just on social and environmental issues, but on things like human rights and on diversity on boards.
So what are you stopping happening as far as irresponsible capitalism is concerned within government?
Well, take, for example, the Royal Mail privatisation. I think the Conservatives probably would have wanted that to be a complete sale. We've made sure that employees will get shares in this company. Worker share ownership, that I believe is one of the examples of
What
share.
proportion of Royal Mail will be worker-owned under your plan?
At least 10%.
Not much, is it?
Well, the point is, if you look at the way worker share ownership has worked elsewhere, that's exactly the size that makes a huge, huge difference.
Isn't that like an old-school Thatcher privatisation with a little worker involvement fig leaf on it, really?
No, there was no privatisation under Thatcher that had written on the face of the bill that workers must get at least 10%. Totally different from Thatcher privatisations. That's the responsible capitalism that Liberal Democrats can deliver in government.
And Liberal Democrats believe that capitalism needs to be constrained, and that's why the mainstream of the Liberal Democrat Party is social liberalism, which is about social justice, and that does mean there has to be some state intervention.
Are you comfortable with the fact that the Lib Dems are driving the privatisation of the Royal Mail?
I'm far more concerned about the marketisation of the NHS and the privatisation of NHS commissioning than I am about what uniform is worn by the people who deliver our post, as long as the universal
You don't think some
delivery
large
guarantee...
financialised interest or a collection of them owning the Royal Mail would represent just another
step? I didn't know the monarch meant so much to you, John. If the monarch is precious to you and you don't believe...
It's a national institution, that's all. It's part of the fabric of British life.
Well,
I'm not sure I want a private equity firm or something owning a substantial stake in it, which is kind of where we will end up inevitably if it's handed over to the stock market.
As I say, what matters to us, okay, pragmatically, is not some symbolic, ideological, possibly class-based sloganising of a student nature, and I'm not accusing you of that. You're far too young to ever be classified as a student-type politician. Look at that sweet look.
Whenever we need a decent answer to one of these questions, we usually find ourselves at the stand run by the Lib Dems' internal ginger group, Liberator.
I think responsible capitalism is quite a nifty slogan, because when you think about it, Tories might not voluntarily use it, but it's very hard to argue against, isn't it? I mean, nobody's going to get up and say, well, actually, I believe in irresponsible capitalism. I mean, it's not a winning slogan, is it?
The Lib Dems are in this coalition. Now, some would say that reforming capitalism in any convincing way, in that scenario, is a bit like trying to get world peace when you change to Genghis Khan, you know.
Yeah. The point is the economic situation is going to get worse before it gets better, and I think some of the more extreme right-wing economic policies are just going to become less and less tenable. I think if there is going to be a policy shift, I think it's going to be less to do with the influence the Lib Dems have and more to do with the fact that members of both parties are just going to be confronted with reality.
So is that the apocalypse, and then we start feeling optimistic?
Yes.
So with Labour, we wouldn't have had the zealous programme of deficit reduction which has got us in this mess, but we wouldn't have had any substantial reform of the economy. And with this government, your suspicion is we will get some degree of convincing reform of the economy, but we still have a scorched earth policy on the public finances.
That is exactly it. That is exactly
What a situation to be in.
I mean, my own view is if only Blair and Brown had been braver, it may be the cabinet had been braver, it may be Labour intellectuals had been tougher, it may be party members had been more aggressive. You know, they could have done some of this stuff, and had they done some of this stuff, I don't think they'd have lost in 2010.
Is there any politician out there, in this party or any other, who has that combination, who understands that zealous deficit reduction isn't the way to go, but at the same time that the economy needs fundamental reform? Is there anyone who understands both those things and thereby gives you cause for hope?
I think both Ed Miliband and Ed Balls believe it, but actually feel they can't say it because they're anxious for to be approved of as being economically sound. And Vince Cable believes it, but can't say it because he's part of a coalition government that is actually doing the opposite to what he believes. That's the situation in 2011.
Let's get some money out, if I've got any. The pub, perhaps. The seed for this film was planted a year ago when the Liberal Democrats had their conference in Liverpool, and in a pub not unlike this, we fell into a heated argument with Liberal Democrat advisers about why their party, like the other two major parties, wouldn't talk about modern capitalism and how to fundamentally reform it. A year on, as evidenced by Vince Cable's speech, that seems to have changed, but it still feels like we're faced with the tragedy of modern British politics. The Tories, as much as they might talk about this stuff occasionally, won't do anything about it. The Labour Party would like to, but it's scared of being seen as left-wing. And some Lib Dems want to, but that opinion isn't shared by their leadership. And in any case, they're in coalition with the Tories, who I just mentioned. Meanwhile, the economic orthodoxy of the last 30 years grinds on. It now looks like the Royal Mail is going to be privatised. And as a German once put it, everything solid melts into air.